Reed Holston had buried enough of the past to know when it came clawing back. The frozen child in his arms wasn't just dying, he was a reckoning. 4 years since the Apache Wars. 4 years since Reed had sworn never to care again. But mercy doesn't ask permission. It just costs you everything. 4 days later, 3 Apache women would stand at his door, and the man who'd survived war would face something far more dangerous, the chance to be human again. This is that story. Stay until the end and comment your city below. I want to see how far this tale of impossible grace can travel. The wind that morning had teeth. Reed Holston felt it gnawing through his coat as he trudged toward the northern fence line, his breath clouding white in the pre-dawn darkness. Something had pulled him from sleep. Not a sound, exactly, more like the absence of one. The kind of silence that meant the world was holding its breath. He'd learned to trust those feelings during the war, the ones that prickled the back of your neck and said, move or wait or run. 4 years since Appomattox, longer since the Apache campaigns out here in the Arizona territory, but some instincts don't fade. They just burrow deeper, waiting. The ranch spread out before him in shades of gray and white, 60 acres of high desert plain locked in winter's fist. His cattle huddled near the windbreak he'd built last fall, their breath rising like small prayers. Everything looked right. Everything felt wrong. Reed was halfway to the fence when he saw the ravens. 3 of them circling something in the brush near the property line. Not the lazy spirals of birds riding thermals, but the tight, purposeful orbits of scavengers who'd found their prize. His gut clenched. Probably a deer, he thought. Maybe a calf that had wandered off and frozen. He almost turned back. Later, he'd wonder about that moment. How close he'd come to choosing the warm cabin over the cold truth. How different everything would be if he'd just let the ravens have their business and gone about his own. But Reed had been a good man once before the war hollowed him out. Before his wife Ellen died, giving birth to a son who never drew breath. Before this ranch became less a home and more a place to wait for nothing in particular. And good men, even broken ones, can't walk away from circling ravens without checking why. The brush was thick with ice, each branch encased in crystal that caught the rising sun and threw it back in fragments. Reed pushed through his boots, crunching on frozen ground. The ravens lifted with lazy flaps, annoyed but not frightened. They knew patience. They could wait. What Reed found stole the air from his lungs. A child, Apache by the look of him. A boy maybe 7 or 8 years old, curled on his star side among the roots of a dead cottonwood. His skin was gray-brown, his lips blue, his eyes closed. He wore buckskin clothing too thin for winter, and his feet, Jesus. His feet were bare, the soles cracked and bleeding. One small hand clutched a doeskin pouch, fingers frozen around it like he'd held on even as consciousness left him. Reed dropped to his knees, his hand shaking as he pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck. Nothing. He tried again, shifting position, pressing harder. They're faint as a whisper, irregular as a drunk's promise, a pulse. God Almighty, Reed breathed. The boy's chest moved barely, a shallow rise and fall that could stop any second. His face was sunken cheekbones pressing against skin like tent poles. Starving. The child was starving, frozen and dying alone in the brush at the edge of Reed's land. For a long moment, Reed just knelt there, mind racing through implications, like cards being dealt. Apache child. Had to have come from one of the scattered bands, still hiding in the mountains, refusing to go to the reservation, which meant soldiers might be hunting him, which meant bringing him home could bring trouble. The ravens circled lower. Reed looked at the boy's hand, still clutching that pouch, looked at feet too small to have walked far in this cold, looked at a face that even near death held something fierce in its lines, the same expression he'd seen on Apache warriors before they died. Pride. Refusal to beg. Hell, Reed muttered. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around the child, then lifted him as gently as he could. The boy weighed nothing, less than nothing. A bundle of bird bones and will. His head lolled against Reed's chest, and up close, Reed could see the tracks of old tears frozen on his cheeks. The walk back to the cabin felt like miles instead of yards. Every step jarring, every movement potentially the one that would stop that fragile heart. Reed found himself talking low and steady, the way he used to talk to spooked horses. "Stay with me now, just stay. Got a fire going, got food. You just hold on, you hear? Just hold on." The boy didn't respond, didn't open his eyes, but that thread-thin pulse kept beating against Reed's arm, and that was enough. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, windows that rattled in the wind. Reed had built it with Ellen back when the future seemed like something worth constructing. Now it was just walls and memories, most of which he tried to avoid. He kicked the door open and carried the boy straight to the fireplace where embers from the morning fire still glowed. He laid the child on the braided rug Ellen had made, then scrambled to build up the fire. His hands fumbled with kindling, trembled as he fed larger pieces of wood to the growing flames. Behind him, the boy's breathing had gone so shallow Reed couldn't hear it anymore. "No," Reed said sharply, turning back. "No, you don't get to quit now." He grabbed quilts from the bed, his bed, the one he'd shared with Ellen, and piled them over the child, tucking them close but not tight. Hypothermia, he'd seen it in the war. You couldn't warm someone too fast or their heart would give out. Slow and steady, gentle. The boy's skin felt like ice. Reed pulled off the frozen buckskin clothing, working carefully around limbs that barely seemed attached to anything. The child's ribs stood out like barrel staves. His stomach was concave, hollow. Days without food, maybe longer. "Christ, kid, what happened to you?" No answer. Just that terrible stillness, broken only by the faintest rise and fall of his chest. Reed heated water on the stove, mixed it with cold until it was barely warm, then soaked a cloth and pressed it to the boy's lips. A drop, another, waiting. The throat didn't move. He tried again, letting water pool at the corner of the child's mouth. Nothing. "Come on," Reed whispered. "Come on, damn you. Swallow." He'd seen men die before, watched the light leave their eyes on battlefields from Virginia to New Mexico, held his wife's hand, and as she bled out on Kant, they'd bought together in Tucson. Death was an old acquaintance, familiar as morning. But this felt different. This felt like watching the world decide whether it had room for one more small life or if it was full up on mercy. The boy's throat moved, just a flicker barely visible, but Reed saw it. Saw the water disappear and the throat work to pull it down. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "That's it. There you go." Another drop, another swallow. Slow work, patient work, the kind that made minutes feel like hours. But gradually, so gradually, Reed almost missed it. Color began to creep back into the boy's lips. The blue faded to purple to pale pink. Reed lost track of time. The sun climbed toward noon and he didn't notice. The fire burned down and he built it back up. His knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor and he ignored them. There was only the boy, the water, the slow coaxing of life back into a body that had nearly given up. Somewhere around midday, the child's eyes flickered open. They were dark, so dark they seemed black in the firelight, and for a moment they stared at nothing, unfocused and confused. Then they found Reed's face, and something in them sharpened. Awareness, recognition of the fact that he was alive and that this white man hovering over him was the reason. Fear followed fast. The boy tried to move, a jerky attempt to pull away that got tangled in quilts and weakness. A small sound escaped his throat, not quite a cry, more like a wounded animal's warning. "Easy," Reed said, holding his hands up and back. "Easy now, you're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." The boy didn't understand English, that much was clear, but he understood tone the way all creatures do. His eyes tracked Reed's movements, wary as a coyote watching a trap. Reed pointed to himself. "Reed," then to the boy. "You?" No response. Just those watchful eyes calculating distance to the door, odds of survival if he ran. Reed tried again, gesturing to the water cup. Drink. The boy's gaze flicked to the cup, and Reed saw his throat work. Thirsty. Still desperately thirsty. But pride or fear or some combination held him frozen. Here, Reed poured fresh water, set the cup on the floor between them, and slid it slowly toward the child. Then he backed away, giving space. For a long moment, nothing happened. The boy stared at the cup like it might bite him. Then, moving like every muscle hurt, he reached out one thin hand and pulled it close. He drank in small sips, careful, controlled, even though Reed could see the want screaming in every line of his body. When the cup was empty, the boy set it down and looked at Reed again. Some of the fear had faded, replaced by confusion. "You're wondering why?" Reed said quietly. "Why I brought you in, why I'm helping." He didn't have a good answer, didn't fully understand it himself. He'd spent 4 years avoiding people, avoiding connection, avoiding anything that might crack the careful walls he'd built around the hollow place where his heart used to be. This child should have been easy to walk past, should have been someone else's problem. But he'd looked at those frozen feet and seen his son's feet, the ones that never touched ground. He'd seen that clutched pouch and thought of Ellen's hands, holding on to nothing as she slipped away. He'd felt that pulse against his fingers and remembered what it was like to believe life was worth saving. "I don't know," Reed admitted. Seemed like the thing to do. The boy watched him, understanding nothing and everything at once. Reed stood slowly, keeping his movements obvious and non-threatening. "I'm going to make you something to eat. Broth, easy on the stomach. You just rest." He moved to the stove, aware of those eyes following him. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows like it wanted in. Inside, the fire crackled and warmth spread through the small space, pushing back against the cold. Reed put a pot on the stove, added water and a handful of jerky, some dried vegetables Ellen had put up before she died. As it heated, filling the cabin with the smell of cooking food, he found himself talking again. To the boy, to himself, to the ghosts that lived in the corners. Had a wife once, Ellen. She would have done this without thinking twice, would have seen you in that brush and just known what to do. She was good that way, good with kids, with hurt things. Me, I'm just stumbling through. The broth began to simmer. Reed stirred it, watching the jerky soften and the vegetables rehydrate. We were going to have a son. Did have one, I guess, but he didn't stay. She didn't either. Left me with this place and no idea what to do with it. No idea what to do with anything. He poured a cup of broth, blew on it to cool it, carried it back to the boy. The child's eyes had started to drift closed, exhaustion pulling him under, but they opened again when Reed knelt beside him. "Drink this, slow." This time the boy took the cup without hesitation. He drank, and Reed watched his face transform surprise, then something close to wonder. Like he'd forgotten food could taste good. Like warmth was a miracle he'd given up expecting. "There's more," Reed said. "You can have more, but not too fast or you'll be sick." He rationed it out over the next hour, small amounts, careful spacing, watching to make sure the boy's stomach could handle it. Between cups, the child dozed, his body's need for sleep warring with his instinct to stay alert. Reed sat nearby, adding wood to the fire, mending the boy's torn buckskin clothing, trying not to think too hard about what came next, because something would come next. This child didn't appear out of nowhere. He had people somewhere, or had had them. A mother who'd braided that doeskin pouch, a father who'd taught him to survive, a tribe that was either looking for him or had already mourned him as lost. Reed examined the pouch the boy still clutched even in sleep. It was beautifully made, decorated with beadwork in patterns Reed didn't recognize. Inside, he found a smooth stone, a hawk's feather, and a small bundle of sage. Medicine items, maybe, or just treasures a child might carry. "Where'd you come from, kid?" Reed murmured. "And how do I get you back?" The boy slept through the afternoon, his breathing evening out. His color improving with each hour. Reed stayed close, stoking the fire, keeping watch, feeling something he hadn't felt in years slowly awakening in his chest. Purpose. He'd forgotten what it felt like. The sense that what you did mattered. that your choices affected something beyond just your own slow march toward nothing. This child breathing softly under quilts that smelled like Ellen's lavender soap was alive because Reed had walked toward ravens instead of away from them. Because he'd chosen to care when caring seemed pointless. Dusk came early in winter. Shadows stretched across the cabin floor, and outside the temperature plummeted. Reed lit lamps, made himself coffee, ate jerky, standing at the window while he watched the darkening plain. Behind him, the boy stirred. Reed turned to find those dark eyes open again, more alert now. The child pushed himself up on one elbow, looking around the cabin with obvious wariness. His gaze lingered on the rifle above the fireplace, the skinning knife on the table cataloging threats. "Hey," Reed said softly, "you're all right. Still safe." The boy's attention swung to him, and for the first time Reed saw something other than fear in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or calculation. The child was taking his measure, trying to understand this white man who'd brought him in from the cold. Reed crossed to the stove and ladled out more broth. "Hungry?" The boy nodded, a small, tentative movement. "Good, that's good." They sat together as night fell, the boy drinking broth, Reed drinking coffee, neither understanding the other's words, but finding a rhythm in the silence. The fire popped and hissed. Wind prowled around the cabin like something looking for a way in. "I'll get you home," Reed said eventually. "Soon as you're strong enough, I'll find your people, get you back where you belong." The boy tilted his head, not understanding, but listening anyway. "Might take a few days. You've been through hell. Need to build your strength up." Reed paused, then added, "I've got time, not doing anything else." Which was true and had been true for 4 years. Time was all Reed had, stretching out empty in all directions. But now, looking at this child who'd survived impossible odds, he felt the shape of those days changing, felt them filling with something that looked almost like meaning. The boy finished his broth and set the cup down carefully. Then, moving slowly, like he was testing whether he was allowed, he pulled the doeskin pouch close and opened it. He took out the smooth stone and held it up to the firelight, examining it with an expression Reed couldn't quite read. "That important?" Reed asked. The boy looked at him, then back at the stone. He turned it in his fingers, and firelight caught in its surface quartz, maybe, or something similar. Then he held it out to Reed. Reed blinked. "You want to show me?" The boy pushed the stone closer, insistent. Carefully, Reed took it. The stone was warm from the child's hand, smooth as river water. In the lamplight, he could see inclusions in the quartz, tiny fractures that caught and held the glow like captured stars. "It's beautiful," Reed said. The boy watched his face intently, and when Reed smiled, a small, genuine expression he hadn't felt cross his features in months. Something in the child's expression eased. Just a fraction, just enough to matter. Reed handed the stone back, and the boy tucked it carefully into the pouch. They sat together as the night deepened, warmth from the fire pushing back against the cold that pressed at the windows. Reed found himself talking again, filling the silence with words the boy couldn't understand, but seemed to find comfort in anyway. "Used to sit here with Ellen, right here by this fire. She'd read while I worked on tack or cleaned my rifle. Peaceful, you know, just being together. Didn't need to fill every minute with noise." He paused, remembering. "After she died, I couldn't stand it. The quiet felt like it was going to swallow me whole. But you get used to it, get used to being alone, start to think that's just how it is now." The boy's eyes were drifting closed again, but he fought it, trying to stay alert. "Sleep," Reed said gently. "You're safe, I promise." Whether the child understood the words or just the tone, his eyes finally slid shut. His breathing evened out, and within minutes he was deeply asleep. Reed sat watching him for a long time. The boy looked impossibly small in the nest of quilts, his face still showing the gauntness of near starvation, but peaceful now, unmarked by fear. One hand rested on the doeskin pouch, holding on even in sleep. "God help me," Reed whispered. "What have I done?" because he knew, with the certainty that came from 4 years of bitter experience, that this moment, this simple act of mercy, was going to change everything. You couldn't pull someone back from death without consequences. You couldn't choose to care without opening yourself up to all the pain that came with it. But he'd made his choice out in the frozen brush, and there was no unmaking it now. The night stretched on. Reed dozed in his chair, jerking awake at intervals to check the fire to make sure the boy still breathed. Outside, the wind sang its lonely song across the plain, and somewhere far off a coyote howled. Reed didn't know that in 3 days the past would arrive at his door, didn't know that mercy had roots deeper than he could imagine, connections that stretched back through the child's frozen footprints to 3 women walking through snow. Didn't know that saving one life meant tangling his own with threads he couldn't see yet. He just knew that for the first time in 4 years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like possibility. Dawn on the 4th day broke cold and clear, the kind of morning that made the frozen world look clean enough to forgive its cruelty. Reed stood at the window with his coffee, watching light spill across the plain like something poured from a pitcher. Behind him, the boy, Tojo, he'd learned through gestures and patience, slept curled beneath the quilts, his breathing steady and strong. 4 days. 4 days of careful feeding, of watching color return to gray skin, of building something that felt almost like trust between silence and need. The child could sit up now without trembling, could hold a cup without spilling, could almost smile when Reed made faces over breakfast to coax him to eat. Reed had started to think maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Find the boy's people, return him safely. Walk away with nothing changed except the knowledge that he'd done one good thing in a world that seemed to specialize in the opposite. He should have known better. The sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge when he saw them, 3 figures moving across the white plain like shadows given form. Reed's hand went to the rifle above the mantel, old instincts snapping into place. Riders usually meant trouble out here, but these weren't riding. They were walking, and even from a distance he could see the exhaustion in how they moved. Women. Reed's breath caught. 3 Apache women walking straight toward his cabin, like they knew exactly where they were going, like they'd been following something, someone. Behind him, Tojo stirred. Reed turned to find the boy sitting up, his eyes fixed on the window with an intensity that made Reed's gut clench. The child had heard something or sensed something before Reed had even seen the women. Now his whole body was rigid, torn between hope and disbelief. "They yours?" Reed asked quietly. Tojo's lips moved, forming a word Reed couldn't hear. His hands gripped the quilt so tight his knuckles went pale. Reed looked back out the window. The women were closer now, maybe 100 yards out. They wore traditional Apache clothing layered with whatever they'd scavenged for warmth, blankets, a ragged coat, shawls wrapped tight against the cold. Their feet left tracks in the frost, a trail that would tell anyone with eyes exactly where they'd come from and where they were going. One of them, the one in front, walked with a purpose that bordered on fury. Even exhausted, even half-frozen, she moved like violence barely contained. The second seemed gentler, her steps careful, supporting the third woman who limped badly. Reed's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. They'd been tracking the boy. Had to be. Following whatever trail he'd left before the snow covered it, before he'd collapsed at Reed's fence line. They'd walked for days in killing cold, and now they were here, and Reed had their child. "God Almighty," he muttered. He grabbed his coat, then hesitated. The rifle. Should he take it? He looked at Tojo, saw the boy's face transformed by something between terror and desperate hope, and left the weapon where it was. Whatever was coming through his door, he wouldn't meet it with a gun. Reed stepped out onto the porch as the women reached the yard. The morning cold bit through his shirt, but he barely felt it. All his attention was locked on the woman in front, the one whose eyes burned with an intensity that made him want to step back even as he forced himself to stand firm. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with features that would have been beautiful if they weren't carved into an expression of absolute determination. Her long dark hair was braided and threaded with strips of red cloth. She wore a deerskin dress under layers of blankets, and her hands, Reed noticed, her hands immediately were scarred and raw from cold. They stopped 10 feet from the porch. For a moment nobody spoke. The silence stretched taut as wire, thrumming with everything unsaid. Then the woman's eyes went past Reed to the window, and her face changed. Everything changed. The fury cracked, and underneath it was something so raw it hurt to witness. "Tojo," she breathed. The cabin door banged open behind Reed. He turned to find the boy stumbling out barefoot on the frozen porch, the quilts falling from his shoulders. The woman, his mother, had to be, made a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a cry. And suddenly they were moving toward each other. Reed stepped aside as the woman rushed past him. She caught Tojo as his legs gave out, dropping to her knees and pulling him against her with a fierceness that spoke of days, maybe weeks, of thinking him dead. Her hands ran over his face, his arms checking for injuries, while words poured out in Apache questions, prayers, things Reed couldn't understand but felt in his chest anyway. The other two women had reached the porch. The gentle one looked at Reed with eyes red from crying, and cold, her expression caught between gratitude and uncertainty. The third, the one who'd been limping, leaned heavily on her companion and watched the reunion with a face that revealed nothing. Reed stood frozen, unsure whether to give them space or stay close, unsure of his role in this moment he'd set in motion 4 days ago when he'd refused to walk past circling ravens. The mother, Asha, he'd learn later, finally looked up at him. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were steady now, measuring. She said something in Apache, her voice low and controlled, despite the emotion bleeding through. Reed spread his hands. "I don't understand." She switched to Spanish, halting, but clear. "You have our son." "Had," Reed corrected gently. "I found him dying, brought him inside, fed him, that's all." Asha's eyes narrowed, searching his face for deception. Why? It was the same question Reed had been asking himself for 4 days. He still didn't have a good answer. Seemed like the thing to do. "White men do not help Apache," she said flatly. "White men kill Apache." The words hit like stones, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Reed thought of the campaigns he'd ridden the villages, burned the orders, followed without question. Thought of how easy it had been to see enemies instead of people, to justify horror in the name of civilization. "Some do," he admitted. "I did, once, but not anymore. Not him." Asha studied him for a long moment. Tojo whispered something to her, urgent and insistent, his small hands clutching her arm. She listened without taking her eyes off Reed, and whatever the boy said made something in her expression shift. She stood slowly, helping Tojo up with her. "He says you gave him warmth, food, kindness." Her voice caught on the last word, like it was in a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "He says you did not hurt him." "No?" "Why?" she asked again, and this time it wasn't an accusation. It was genuine confusion, the question of someone who'd learned not to expect mercy from the world. Reed looked at the boy, shivering between them, at the two other women watching from the porch, at this moment that felt like standing on the edge of something he couldn't see the bottom of. "Come inside," he said. "All of you. It's too cold to talk out here." Asha tensed, and Reed saw the calculation flash across her face. They were vulnerable, exhausted, half-frozen. Walking into his cabin meant putting themselves at his mercy, and she had no reason to trust that mercy existed. But Tojo was shaking, his bare feet blue against the frost, and the woman on the porch looked ready to collapse. Survival outweighed caution. "We come," Asha said finally, "but if this is trap, it's not." Reed interrupted. "I swear it's not." He stepped back and held the door open, gesturing them inside. Asha went first, keeping Tojo close, her eyes scanning the cabin for threats. The gentle woman helped her companion up the steps and through the door. Reed followed last, closing out the cold and the morning light. Inside the cabin that had held only Reed and the boy for 4 days suddenly felt crowded. The women stood in a tight group near the door, ready to bolt. Tojo pressed against his mother's side, one hand still gripping her dress. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in a silence that stretched like glass about to break. Reed moved slowly to the stove, keeping his hands visible. "There's coffee, and I can make food. You look like you've been walking a long time." Asha said something in Apache to the other women. The gentle one replied, her voice soft and musical, even in exhaustion. The third woman, the one with the limp, just shook her head and kept watching Reed with eyes that reminded him of a hawk's, missing nothing. "My sister Tula says yes to food," Asha translated, nodding at the gentlewoman. "Ren says we should not trust you." Reed looked at Ren, saw the hardness in her face that came from surviving things that should have killed you. "She's probably right not to," he admitted, "but I'm offering anyway." He poured coffee into cups Ellen had brought from St. Louis, set them on the table, then started pulling out what food he had. Bread from 2 days ago, still good enough. Dried meat, some eggs from his chickens. He worked in silence, aware of them watching every move, aware that this moment was fragile as ice in sunlight. Tula spoke again, longer this time, and Asha replied. Their voices rose and fell in a language Reed couldn't follow, but he caught the tone, Tula arguing for something, Asha resisting, Ren adding sharp comments that sounded like warnings. Finally Asha sighed. "Tula says sit, says we die on our feet if we do not rest." "She's right," Reed said. "Please, sit." They moved to the table like wild things approaching a trap, ready to scatter at the first wrong move. Asha kept Tojo close. Tula helped Ren into a chair, then took one herself. Reed set the coffee in front of them and stepped back, giving space. Ren reached for her cup first, her scarred hands wrapping around the warmth. She didn't drink, just held it, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Tula took a small sip, then closed her eyes like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Asha ignored the coffee and focused on getting Tojo wrapped in a blanket from the pile Reed had left by the fire. Reed scrambled eggs in a pan, sliced bread, worked with an efficiency born from years of cooking for one. The smell of food filled the cabin, and he heard someone's stomach growl audibly. Tula's, maybe, or Ren's. They were starving, he realized. Not as bad as Tojo had been, but close. He served the food on plates Ellen had painted, with tiny blue flowers, set them out with forks she'd brought in her trousseau. The women stared at the offering like it might disappear if they blinked. "Eat," Reed said gently. "Please." Asha spoke to Tojo first, making sure the boy had food before she touched her own plate. Then finally she picked up her fork. The other women followed her lead. They ate slowly at first, careful, then faster as their bodies remembered hunger. Reed stood by the stove and watched them. Watched Tojo eat scrambled eggs with the intensity of someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. Watched Tula close her eyes over each bite like she was committing it to memory. Watched Ren eat with mechanical efficiency, fueling a body she needed to survive, even as her expression revealed nothing. Watched Asha, who kept glancing at him between bites, her face a map of emotions he couldn't quite read. When the plates were empty, Tula spoke again, longer this time. Asha listened, then looked at Reed. "Tula says thank you. Says you have shown more kindness in one morning than we have seen in many seasons." She paused. "She wants to know why." "I found your son dying," Reed said simply. "What else was I supposed to do? Leave him?" Ren said in heavily accented English, her first words. "Is what soldiers do, what settlers do, leave Apache to die." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with history Reed couldn't deny. "I'm not a soldier anymore," he said quietly. "Haven't been for years." "But you were," Ren pressed. "You kill Apache before." Reed could have lied, could have soft-pedaled the truth or deflected the question, but these women had walked through winter tracking their child, had put themselves at his mercy, and they deserved honesty even if it cut. Yes, he said, during the campaigns, I followed orders, did things I'm not proud of. He met Ren's hard gaze. Things I can't undo. Asha's expression shifted, something dark moving behind her eyes. Which campaigns? Canyon de Shelley. Some others. Reed's voice came out rough. I was young, thought I was doing right. Took me years to understand what we'd actually done. Tula said something soft in Apache. Asha replied, then turned back to Reed. Tula says past is stones we all carry. Says what matters is what we do now in this moment. Asha's jaw tightened. I am not so forgiving. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Reed said. Just offering what I can. Food, warmth, a place to rest until you're strong enough to move on. Why? Asha demanded, and there was real anguish in the question now. Why help us? Why save Tojo? Why give us food? We are nothing to you, less than nothing. We are the people you tried to destroy. Reed was quiet for a moment, thinking about circling ravens and frozen feet and a pulse barely beating against his fingers, thinking about Ellen's grave on the hill behind the cabin and the son who never breathed, and 4 years of learning that surviving wasn't the same as living. Because I'm tired, he said finally. Tired of everything being about old wounds and old wars. Tired of hate being the only thing that makes sense anymore. He gestured at Tojo. He was dying. I could help. That's all. That's everything. Asha stared at him, and Reed saw tears gathering in her eyes, though her expression stayed fierce. You do not know what you have done, she whispered, what you have given back to us. I found a child and brought him home. You found my son, Asha said, her voice breaking. My Tojo, we thought. She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth, fought for control. We thought the soldiers had taken him, thought he was dead. We searched everywhere, followed his tracks until snow covered them, walked for days with nothing, and then we found the tracks again, leading here, and I thought. She couldn't finish. Tula reached over and gripped her hand, saying something low and comforting. Ren's hard expression cracked just enough to show the grief beneath. Tojo climbed into his mother's lap, wrapping his thin arms around her neck. She held him and wept silently, her shoulders shaking. 4 days of terror and hope finally breaking through. Reed turned away, busying himself with cleaning plates that didn't need cleaning, giving them this moment. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the frost. Inside, the fire popped and crackled, and a mother held her son, and 2 women who'd walked through winter finally let themselves believe they might survive. After a while, Asha spoke again, her voice steadier. We cannot stay long. Soldiers patrol this area. If they find us here with you. They won't, Reed interrupted. Nobody comes out here in winter. And if they do, I'll say you're workers I hired. Problem is, you can barely walk. Any of you. You need rest. Ren said something sharp in Apache. Asha replied, then looked at Reed. Ren says accepting help from white man is foolish. Says it will cost us. Everything costs something, Reed acknowledged. But you're alive. Your son's alive. Maybe that's worth the price. Tula spoke again, her gentle voice firm. Asha listened, then sighed. Tula says we stay, 1 day, maybe 2, until we are strong. She fixed Reed with a look that could cut glass. But we do not trust easy. You understand? I understand. And if you try to hurt us, hurt Tojo. I won't. I will kill you. She finished as calmly as if she were discussing the weather. I will kill you, and Ren will help, and Tula will say prayers over your body, but you will still be dead. Reed believed her absolutely. Fair enough. Something that might have been respect flickered across Asha's face. She stood helping Tojo down. We need to sleep. Where? Reed gestured to the bedroom. There, I'll take the floor out here. No, Asha said. We stay together. You stay where we can see you. More distrust, but earned distrust. Reed nodded. All right, I'll bank the fire, make sure we stay warm. You rest. The women moved into the bedroom, Asha carrying Tojo, Tula helping Ren. Reed heard them settling, heard low voices in Apache, heard eventually the sound of breathing evening out into sleep. He sat in his chair by the fire and listened to his cabin filled with life for the first time in 4 years. 4 Apache women and a child sleeping under his roof. People who had every reason to hate him, who he had every reason to fear, all of them bound together by nothing more than the simple fact that he'd refused to walk past a dying boy. Outside, clouds were building on the western horizon. More snow coming, Reed thought. Maybe a storm. They'd be stuck here longer than a day or two if the weather turned. Stuck together in this small space, circling each other like wary animals, trying to figure out if trust was possible or just another way to get hurt. Reed closed his eyes and thought about Ellen, about what she would have done in this moment. She would have known the right words, the right gestures. She would have made these women feel safe instead of cornered. But Ellen was gone, and Reed was just a broken man trying to do one decent thing in a world that seemed determined to punish decency. He'd have to be enough. The fire burned low, the morning stretched toward noon, and in the bedroom, 4 survivors of a war that never really ended finally rested while outside the first snowflakes began to fall. The storm hit that afternoon like a fist, transforming the world beyond the windows into a wall of white nothing. Reed stood watching it build, seeing his prediction come true with a mixture of resignation and something else he couldn't quite name. They were trapped now, all of them, for days, maybe longer. Behind him he heard movement from the bedroom. Asha emerged first, her eyes going immediately to the windows, to the blizzard howling beyond. Her face tightened as she understood what Reed had already accepted. How long, she asked. 3 days at least, maybe more. He gestured at the whiteness. Can't even see the barn from here. Nobody's going anywhere in this. Asha closed her eyes briefly, and Reed saw her run through calculations, food, water, fuel, the impossibility of 5 people living in close quarters when trust was as scarce as warmth. When she opened her eyes again, her expression was set. Then we work, she said simply. Work. You cannot keep this place alone in winter. We will not sit idle while you labor. She crossed to the window, studying what little she could see of the ranch through the storm. Animals need tending. Wood needs cutting. We help, or we are burden. We do not be burden. Reed started to argue, to say they were guests, that they needed rest. But he saw the steel in her spine and understood. This wasn't about politeness or obligation. This was about dignity, about not being helpless in the home of a man who'd once ridden against her people. All right, he said. We work together then. Tula appeared in the bedroom doorway, Tojo tucked against her side. She spoke to Asha in Apache, her voice carrying a question. Asha replied and Tula nodded, then said something that made Asha's mouth quirk in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Tula says she will cook, Asha translated. Says men always cook badly, even kind ones. Can't argue with that, Reed admitted. Ellen used to say the same thing. Ellen, my wife. She died 4 years back. Asha's expression softened fractionally. You wear grief like old coat. I see it on you since we arrived. The observation was so accurate it stole Reed's breath. He'd thought he'd hidden it better, buried it deeper, but this woman who'd walked through winter to find her son saw right through him. Some coats you can't take off, he said quietly. No, Asha agreed. Some you wear until they wear you. They stood there for a moment, 2 people who'd lost things they couldn't name, connected by the simple recognition of shared pain. Then Ren emerged from the bedroom limping but upright, and the moment passed. Ren said something sharp in Apache. Asha's jaw tightened, but she translated. Ren says stop talking and start working, says Storm does not care about our words. She's right. Reed pulled on his coat. I need to check the animals, make sure they've got feed and water. Someone should come with me. 2 people are less likely to get lost than 1. I come, Asha said immediately. Ren protested in rapid Apache, but Asha cut her off with a response that sounded final. She turned to Reed. I go. Ren stays with Tula and Tojo. She cannot walk far on that leg anyway. Reed wanted to argue, to point out that Asha had just walked for days through snow and was probably exhausted. But he recognized the same stubborn determination he'd seen in soldiers who refused to admit they were wounded. Some battles you couldn't win. He handed her his spare coat, watched her pull it on, over her layers. It was too big, swallowing her frame, but it was wool and thick, and would keep the worst of the cold out. She tied a scarf around her face, leaving only her eyes visible. Stay close, Reed said. I've got rope. We'll tie ourselves together. That way, if one of us goes down, the other can find them. Asha nodded. Reed tied the rope around his waist, then around hers, leaving about 10 feet between them. Enough to move freely, not enough to lose each other in the white. They stepped out into the storm, and the world disappeared. Reed had been through blizzards before, but this one was fierce, even by territory standards. The wind hit like a living thing, trying to tear them off their feet. Snow came horizontal, stinging any exposed skin. Visibility was maybe 5 feet, if that. He oriented himself by memory, counting steps to where the barn should be. Behind him, connected by rope, Asha followed. He could feel her presence through the line, could feel her stumble once and catch herself, could feel her determination transmitted through hemp fiber. The barn loomed out of the white suddenly enough that Reed almost walked into it. He fumbled for the door, got it open, pulled Asha inside. They stood in the relative quiet, breathing hard, ice already forming on their scarves. The animals shifted in their stalls, nervous from the storm. Reed's milk cow lowed softly. The chickens muttered from their roost. His 2 horses stamped and snorted. Asha pulled down her scarf, looking around the barn with professional assessment. They have feed, some, not enough if this storm lasts a week. Then we ration, give them what they need, no more. She moved to the cow without hesitation, running her hands over the animal's flanks with practiced ease. She needs milking. I usually do it in the morning. Storm does not care about usually. Asha found the stool and bucket without being told where to look. I milk, you feed others. They worked in silence, broken only by the storm's howl and animal sounds. Reed forked hay into the stalls, checked water buckets, made sure everything was secure. Asha milked the cow with efficient pulls, the sound rhythmic and somehow calming. He found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, watching how she moved, confident and capable despite exhaustion, watching how she spoke softly to the cow in Apache, words he didn't understand but that gentled the animal, watching how she'd pushed up her sleeves and he could see scars on her forearms, old Burns knife wounds, the marks of a life lived hard. You watch me, Asha said without looking up. Why? Reed jerked his attention back to the hay. Sorry, didn't mean to stare. I do not ask why you sorry, I ask why you watch. He thought about lying, deflecting, settled on truth instead. Trying to figure you out, I guess. You and your sisters. Not sisters, Asha corrected. Tula is cousin. Ren is... She paused, searching for words. Ren is survivor of same massacre. We become family after soldiers kill our families. The words landed like stones. Reed's hands stilled on the pitchfork. The massacre at, does not matter which one, Asha cut him off, her voice hard. Your people have many massacres, we have many dead. Reed couldn't argue, didn't try. He just went back to feeding the horses, the weight of history pressing down like the snow outside. Asha finished milking and stood covering the bucket. I should hate you, she said conversationally. White man, former soldier, man who rode in campaigns against my people. Should hate you for what you are, what you represent. But you don't. I do not know what I feel. She looked at him directly, her dark eyes unflinching. You saved Tojo. You gave us shelter, food, warmth. You ask nothing in return. You do not touch us, threaten us, demand payment. This does not fit with what I know of white men. Maybe you've just met the wrong ones." "No," Asha said softly. "I have met many. Good ones, bad ones, ones who speak peace and bring war. But you—" She gestured at the barn, at the tended animals, at the bucket of milk she held. "You are different. I do not know if this makes you safe or more dangerous." "I'm not dangerous, not to you. Everyone is dangerous to someone." She moved toward the door, then paused. "But I think maybe you are dangerous only to yourself. You punish yourself for old sins, live alone, push away joy. This is slow death, Reed Holston." The use of his name startled him. He hadn't told her it, which meant Tojo must have. The sound of it in her voice, accented and careful, did something strange to his chest. "We should get back," he said roughly, "before the storm gets worse." They tied themselves together again and pushed out into the white. The return trip was harder, fighting against wind that seemed determined to drive them off course. Reed counted steps corrected when the rope tugged wrong, kept them moving toward where the cabin should be. Asha went down once, her foot catching on something buried in snow. Reed felt the rope go slack and turned, pulling hand over hand until he found her. She was already pushing herself up, refusing help, but he saw her wince as weight hit her ankle. "You hurt?" "No." "Asha." "I said no." She got to her feet, jaw set. "We go." They made it back to the cabin, half-frozen ice crusted on every surface. Tula took one look at them and started giving orders. In Apache, pulling them toward the fire, unwrapping scarves and coats with efficient hands. She had coffee ready, hot and strong, and she pressed cups into their numb fingers. Ren sat with Tojo by the hearth, teaching him something with string, some kind of game or pattern. She looked up when they entered, her eyes finding Asha and cataloging her condition. Whatever she saw made her expression tighten, but she said nothing. "The animals?" Tula asked in Spanish, her voice gentle. "Fed and safe," Asha replied in the same language, then switched to English for Reed's benefit. "For now." "Storm is bad," Tula observed, glancing at the windows. "We are here for days, I think." "At least," Reed agreed. He looked at the women, at Tojo, at his small cabin that seemed even smaller now. "We'll need to work together. Ration food, take turns with chores, keep the fire going. It'll be tight, but we'll manage." "We are used to tight spaces," Ren said in her heavily accented English, not looking up from the string game. "We are used to surviving." The days that followed developed their own rhythm, born from necessity and the strange intimacy of people trapped together by weather. They divided labor without much discussion. Reed and Asha handled the animals and outdoor work. Tula managed the cooking and the cabin's warmth. Ren taught Tojo and did what tasks her injured leg allowed. They learned to move around each other in the confined space, learned the small courtesies that kept people from going crazy when walls closed in. Reed gave the bedroom to the women and child took the floor by the fire for himself. Asha argued at first, but he was immovable on this point. They were guests, whatever else they were, and he wouldn't take their rest. The storm raged for 3 days solid, 3 days of wind that screamed, and snow that never stopped, and a world reduced to the space between cabin walls. They ventured out only when necessary to tend animals, to dig paths that filled in again within hours, to bring in more firewood from the dwindling pile under the porch. Reed and Asha made these trips together, connected by rope, learning to read each other's movements through the line. She never complained, never hesitated, just pulled on the too big coat and followed him into the white. Her ankle twisted that first day slowed her, but didn't stop her. When Reed noticed her favoring it, she just gave him a look that said clearly, "Don't." On the 4th day, the storm eased enough to see more than 5 feet. Reed stood at the window studying the transformed landscape. Snow had drifted against the north side of the cabin, coming halfway up the walls. The path to the barn was buried. The world looked clean and new and absolutely lethal. "How much food do we have left?" Asha asked, coming to stand beside him. Reed had been running the calculations in his head for 2 days. Enough for maybe a week if we're careful, less if the storm comes back. And if it lasts longer, then we get creative. Asha was quiet for a moment, studying the snow. In the old days, when winters were hard, we would share everything. One family's meat, another's grain, another's dried fruit. No one had plenty, but everyone had enough. That's a good system. It requires trust. She looked at him. Your people do not trust easy, neither do mine. No, Reed agreed, but maybe we can learn. Something shifted in her expression, some calculation being made that he couldn't read. Then she turned from the window. I will tell the others we must ration more carefully. That night, as they sat around the fire after a sparse dinner, Tula began to sing. Her voice was low and sweet, the melody unfamiliar but beautiful. The words were Apache, incomprehensible to read, but the emotion translated perfectly. Longing, loss, hope, stubborn enough to survive winter. Ren joined in on the second verse, her voice rougher but true. Then Asha, her voice weaving between the others like a third strand in a braid. Tojo hummed along, not quite hitting the notes, but trying. Reed sat and listened, transfixed. He'd heard Apache songs before, but those had been war cries, death chants, the sounds of an enemy. This was different. This was music made for comfort, for connection, for reminding each other that beauty could exist even in hard times. When the song ended, silence filled the cabin, not uncomfortable, just present. What was that about? Reed asked finally. Tula answered in Spanish. About the stars, how they remember us even when we cannot see them through clouds, how they wait for us to look up again. Reed thought about that stars hidden by storm, waiting to be seen again. It's beautiful. My mother's song, Asha said quietly. She sang it every winter, said it reminded her that hard times pass. Did they pass, I mean? Asha's smile was sad. Eventually, though not always the way we hope. The fire crackled. Outside, wind still prowled, but with less fury than before. The storm was dying, Reed thought. Maybe by morning they'd be able to dig out, assess damage, figure out what came next. Tojo had fallen asleep against his mother, his small face peaceful. Asha stroked his hair absently, her expression distant. He looks better, Reed observed. Stronger. Because of you. Asha's voice was soft. Every day I watch him eat, watch color in his face, watch him smile again, and I think this white man gave me back my son. How do I understand this? You don't have to understand it. It just is. Nothing just is. Everything has reason, purpose, cost. She looked at him directly. What is your cost, Reed Holston? What do you want from us? Reed could have said nothing, could have claimed pure altruism, but they'd been living in close quarters for days now, and pretense seemed pointless. I want to stop feeling dead, he said. Want to remember what it's like to be part of something other than my own grief. I see you with Tojo, see Tula cooking, see Ren teaching, see people being a family, and I remember what I lost, what I chose to stop looking for. Asha studied his face. You give away your warmth too easily, she said finally. The coat, the food, the shelter, you give and give. What do you keep for yourself? Enough to survive. Survival is not same as living. She shifted Tojo's weight carefully. I learned this when soldiers killed my husband, learned I could wake up every day, eat, walk, speak, and still be dead inside. Took Tula Ren, this boy, to teach me difference. What is the difference? Connection, Asha said simply. Living means being tied to others. Survival is being alone and calling it safety. The words hit harder than they should have. Reed thought about 4 years of solitude, of convincing himself it was better this way, cleaner, thought about how quickly that certainty had crumbled when faced with a dying child. I don't know how to do that anymore, he admitted. Connect, I mean. You do it already. Asha gestured around the cabin. This is connection. You just too stubborn to see it. Tula spoke then a question in Apache. Asha replied, and the two women had a brief exchange. Wren from her corner added something that sounded like a warning. "What?" Reed asked. Asha hesitated, then said, "Tula asks how long we stay after storm ends. Wren says we leave as soon as possible. Says staying near white man, even kind one, is dangerous. And what do you think?" "I think—" Asha stopped, looked at her son, then back at Reed. "I think maybe we already too connected to leave easy. I think maybe that is dangerous too, but different kind of dangerous." Reed understood what she wasn't saying. They'd crossed some line without meaning to build something fragile in the space between fear and necessity. Leaving would mean breaking it, and none of them seemed quite ready for that. "Stay until spring," he heard himself say. "Storm's not done, there'll be more. You're in no shape to travel, and Tojo needs more time to heal. Stay." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. "And if soldiers come," Wren demanded, "I'll say you're hired help. I'll say whatever keeps you safe." "Why?" Asha asked again that eternal question. "Why risk yourself for us?" Reed looked at the fire, at the women gathered around it, at the sleeping child who'd started this whole impossible situation. He thought about Ellen, about the son who never breathed, about 4 years of existing without living. "Because I'm tired of being alone," he said simply. "Because you walked through winter for your son, and that kind of love deserves protection. Because maybe—" He met Asha's eyes. "Maybe we're supposed to help each other survive this. Whatever this is." Asha held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded just once. "We stay. Through winter, then we see." It wasn't a promise, wasn't even really an agreement. But it was enough. That night, as Reed lay by the fire listening to the storm's dying breath, he felt Asha watching him from the bedroom doorway. He turned his head and met her eyes across the dimness. "You give away your warmth too easily," she whispered, echoing her earlier words. "Someday there will be none left." "Maybe," Reed replied. "Or maybe it grows back when you give it to the right people." Asha smiled, then a real smile, small but genuine. "We will see, Reed Holston. We will see." She disappeared back into the bedroom, and Reed was left alone with the dying fire and the slow, impossible understanding that somewhere in the space between finding a dying child and sheltering his family, his own frozen heart had started against all odds to thaw. The storm broke on the 5th day, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and brutally cold. Reed stood on the porch in the weak morning light, surveying snow that had transformed his ranch into something unrecognizable. Drifts reached the eaves in places. The barn was half buried. His fences had disappeared entirely under white. Behind him, the cabin door opened, and Asha stepped out, pulling his coat tight around her shoulders. She'd stopped asking permission to wear it, and Reed had stopped offering. It just was like so many things between them now. "Bad?" she asked. "Bad enough." He pointed toward where the chicken coop should be. "Need to dig out before nightfall, or we'll lose the birds. Barn needs clearing too, and we're going to have to break trail to the creek for water." Asha nodded, already assessing the work. "Tula and I dig. You and Wren handle barn." "Wren can barely walk." "Wren can shovel snow sitting down," Asha replied. "She will not be useless. You understand, none of us will be useless here." Reed understood. It was about pride, about earning their keep in a place where they had no real claim, about not being charity cases, even when charity was all that stood between them and freezing. They worked through the morning, all of them, except Tojo, who Tula stationed by the window to watch and warn if he saw anything moving on the plain. Reed and Wren made slow progress on the barn, shoveling in shifts, her sitting on a stool and working what she could reach while he attacked the higher drifts. Wren worked in silence at first, her face set in grim determination, but after an hour she spoke. "You wonder why I do not trust you." It wasn't a question, but Reed answered anyway. "Can't say I blame you for it. My husband was killed by the soldiers in blue coats. My 2 daughters taken to reservation school. I never see them again. Her shovel bit into snow with mechanical precision. I am told this is for their own good, to civilize them, make them white. Reed's hands stilled. I'm sorry. Sorry does not bring back the dead, does not return stolen children. She looked at him with those hawk eyes. But you save Apache child, give shelter to Apache women, act like we are people worth saving. This confuses me. You are worth saving. You do not know us, do not know what we have done to survive. Some of it not good, not clean. Ren went back to shoveling. Asha thinks you are different. Tula thinks you are gift from spirits. I think you are man who will break our hearts when you remember we are enemy. The words hung between them honest and brutal. Reed thought about all the ways he could respond, all the reassurances he could offer, settled on truth instead. I can't promise I won't let you down, he said. Can't promise I know what I'm doing here, but I can promise I won't hurt you on purpose, won't turn you out, won't call the soldiers, that's all I've got. Ren studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Is more than most white men offer. Maybe is enough. She paused. Asha cares for you. You see this? Yes. The shift in topic caught Reed off guard. What? You are not blind, man. You see how she looks at you, how she takes your coat without asking now, how she stays close when we work. Ren's expression was unreadable. She has not looked at man this way since her husband died. This worries me. Reed's chest tightened. He'd felt something shifting between himself and Asha, something that went beyond gratitude or necessity. The way her hand brushed his when they passed tools, the way she said his name, careful and deliberate, the way silence between them had stopped feeling empty and started feeling full. I would never, he started. Never care for her, too late, already happening. Ren leaned on her shovel. Question is what you do about it. You are white man in white man's world. We are Apache women with no place, no people, no safety. Love between you brings only pain. I'm not thinking about love. Liar. Ren's laugh was harsh. You think about it every time you look at her. You think about it when you give her your coat again and again. You think about it when you risk everything to keep us safe. She shook her head. Love is not the question. Question is what kind of man you are, the kind who takes what he wants, or kind who thinks about cost to others. Reed wanted to argue to deny everything she was saying, but Ren's words hit too close to truth he'd been avoiding. He did care for Asha, had started caring somewhere between finding her son and watching her walk into blizzards without complaint, and that caring was complicated by every possible factor: race, history, the fact that she and her family had nowhere else to go. I won't hurt her, he said finally, won't take advantage. Good. Ren went back to shoveling. Because if you do, I will kill you slow. Asha may be strong, but I am one who knows all the ways to make man suffer. Reed believed her absolutely. They finished the barn in silence and returned to the cabin to find Tula had made lunch from their dwindling supplies. Thin soup bread that was more air than substance coffee, stretched with grounds that had been used twice already. Everyone ate without complaint, hunger making even meager portions taste good. Tojo sat pressed against his mother, soaking up her warmth. The boy had been speaking more, teaching Reed words in Apache while learning more English himself. Simple things, water, fire, snow, food, but also mother, family, home, words that carried weight beyond their sounds. After lunch, Asha pulled on the coat again. We get water now, she announced, before light goes. Reed grabbed buckets and the axe for breaking ice. They headed toward the creek, following the rough trail they'd broken that morning. The cold bit deep, the kind that found every gap in clothing and exploited it. Their breath clouded white, freezing on scarves and coat collars. The creek was mostly frozen, just a trickle still running beneath ice thick as a man's arm. Reed swung the axe, breaking through to the water below. Asha knelt and began filling buckets. her hands red and raw despite the gloves Tula had made from scraps. "Your hands are freezing," Reed observed. "Then I work faster." She didn't look up, just kept filling buckets with mechanical efficiency. Reed set down the axe and pulled off his own gloves. "Here." "No." "Asha, I said no." She finally looked at him, and there was something fierce in her expression. "You give too much. Coat, food, shelter, safety. Now gloves. What do you keep for yourself?" Reed Holston. "Enough." "Is it?" She stood, buckets forgotten, and stepped closer. "Ren talks to you today. Yes, tells you I care for you." Reed's heart kicked against his ribs. "She mentioned something." "And what do you think about this, about Apache woman who cares for white man who once killed her people?" There was challenge in her voice, but underneath it something vulnerable. "You think this is gratitude confusion, woman who does not know her own heart. I don't know what to think. Then let me help you think clearly." Asha moved closer still, near enough that he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "I care for you because you are good man trying to be better, because you found my son and saw child, not enemy, because you live with grief and still choose kindness, because when you look at me you see woman, not Apache, not enemy, just woman." "Asha, I am not finished." Her breath clouded between them. "I also care for you because I am tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of world that wants me dead. You offer something different, offer place to rest, to be safe, to maybe," she faltered, "to maybe be happy again. This terrifies me." Reed found himself reaching for her hand without deciding to. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling slightly. "Terrifies me too," he admitted. "Everything about this situation. You're right, I give too much, feel too much, want too much. Been trying not to want anything for 4 years. You and your family show up and suddenly I want everything." "What is everything?" He could have pulled back, could have deflected with a joke or changed the subject. Instead, he told the truth. "You, Tojo calling me father, Tula's cooking filling the cabin, Ren's warnings, a family that doesn't make sense on paper but makes perfect sense in every way that matters." He squeezed her hand gently. "But wanting it doesn't make it right. You need safety, not complications. Need a place to heal, not a white man's feelings making everything harder." Asha was quiet for a moment, studying their joined hands. "You think I am fragile thing, that I do not know my own mind? No, I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. I just..." Reed struggled for words. "I don't want to be another white man who takes what he wants without thinking about consequences." "Then do not take," Asha said simply. "Let me give." She pulled him closer, her free hand coming up to touch his face. Her fingers were freezing, but her touch burned. Reed's breath caught. "I choose this," she whispered. "Choose you, not because I owe you, not because I am confused, not because I have no other options. I choose because my heart, which I thought was dead, wakes up when you are near. Because you make me want to stop running. Because when I imagine future, I imagine it here with you. Asha, if anyone finds out, let them find out." There was steel in her voice now. "I have survived soldiers' starvation, the death of everyone I loved. I can survive town's judgment. Question is, can you?" Reed thought about what she was offering, what it would cost. Thought about neighbors who might turn their backs, soldiers who might ask questions, a whole society built on the idea that people like him and people like her shouldn't mix. Thought about all the reasons this was impossible. Then he thought about her walking through blizzards, about Tojo's smile, about the cabin full of life instead of ghosts, about the possibility that mercy could lead to something more than survival. "Yes," he said, "I can." Asha smiled, then brilliant and real, and kissed him. It was brief, just a press of cold lips against his, but it felt like a door opening, like stepping from winter into warmth, like choosing to live instead of just surviving. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "We will figure out the rest. Together, we figure it out." They collected the water buckets and walked back to the cabin hand in hand, not caring who might see what it might mean. Inside, Tula took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. Ren just shook her head but didn't comment. Tojo ran to his mother and Asha scooped him up, spinning him once before setting him down. "What happens now?" Reed asked that night after the others had gone to bed. He and Asha sat by the fire close enough that their shoulders touched. "Now we live," Asha said. "We make it through winter, we plant crops in spring, we build life from pieces we have left. And when people find out about us, then we deal with it, together." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I am done being afraid, Reed, done letting fear choose my path. If this brings trouble, we face it, but I will not give up this." She gestured at the cabin at them. "Because world says it is wrong." Reed wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. Through the window he could see stars emerging, the same stars Tula had sung about, the ones that waited through storms to be seen again. The next weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. They worked the ranch together, Reed and Asha handling the heavy labor, Tula managing the household, Ren teaching Tojo and doing what she could despite her leg. The cabin that had been Reed's prison became a home filled with voices, laughter, the smell of Tula's cooking. Tojo started calling Reed father in Apache, then in English. The first time Reed's throat closed up so tight he couldn't respond. Asha just smiled and whispered, "He chooses you too." Ren remained watchful, protective, but her warnings grew less frequent. She even started teaching Reed some Apache corrections sharp when he mangled pronunciation. "Sound like cow with sore throat," she'd say, then make him repeat until he got it right. Tula hummed while she worked old songs and new ones, filling the cabin with music. She planted seeds in pots on the windowsill, herbs and vegetables that would go in the ground come spring. "For our garden," she said in Spanish, and the "our" made Reed's chest ache in the best way. One evening, Reed found Asha staring at Ellen's photograph on the mantel. He came to stand beside her, studying his late wife's face, still beautiful, still lost. "She was lovely," Asha said quietly. "She was. You loved her very much." "I did." Reed touched the frame lightly. "Still do, in a way, but it's different now. The grief doesn't crush like it used to, doesn't fill every space until there's no room for anything else." Asha was quiet for a moment, then asked, "If I am here, does she have to leave?" Reed understood what she was really asking. Could he love again, without betraying the memory of his first love? Could new joy coexist with old grief? He thought about it, really thought. Then he carefully took down Ellen's photograph and carried it to the bedroom. He placed it on the dresser there, facing the bed where Ellen had died. Then he returned to the mantel and picked up the beaded doeskin pouch Tojo had been carrying when Reed found him. "Tula made this?" he asked. "Yes, medicine bundle for protection." Asha watched him, understanding dawning. "You want to put it there on mantel?" "If that's all right, seems right somehow. Ellen's memory in the bedroom where she belonged, your family's symbol here where we live now." He held the pouch, feeling its weight. "Both matter, both have place, but we move forward." Asha's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. She took the pouch from his hands and placed it carefully on the mantel. Then she stood back, studying it. "Yes," she said, "this is right." That night she kissed him again, longer this time, deeper. And Reed let himself fall into it, let himself want without guilt, let himself believe that happiness wasn't a betrayal of the past, but a bridge to the future. Winter held on with stubborn fingers, but slowly, so slowly, the days began to lengthen. The snow started to soften, ice on the creek grew thinner, and one morning in late February, Reed woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves. Thaw was coming. Asha found him on the porch, listening to the drip-drop of melting snow. She leaned against him, and he pulled her close. "Spring soon," she observed. "Soon," he agreed. "We'll be able to plant, get the cattle out to better grazing, fix fence." "We." She repeated the word like a test. You say we now, not I. Habit, I guess. Good one, though. Asha was quiet for a moment, then said, I am with child. The world stopped. Reed's heart stopped. Everything stopped except the drip of water and the weight of those words. Your yes. She placed his hand on her belly, still flat, but holding the future. 2 months, maybe. I was not sure, but Tula confirmed it yesterday. There will be baby in autumn. Reed couldn't speak, couldn't process the magnitude of what she was telling him. A child, their child, growing inside her while winter died and spring prepared to be born. Say something, Asha whispered, and he heard fear in her voice. Fear that he'd reject this reject, her reject the impossible complication of a mixed-blood child in a world that had no place for such things. Reed pulled her fully into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. I'm going to be a father, he said, voice rough with emotion. Really a father this time. You are afraid, terrified, he admitted, of everything this means, everything we'll face, but also, he pulled back to look at her to see the woman he loved, carrying the future he'd thought impossible. Also grateful, also happy, also so full of hope it scares me more than any fear. Asha smiled through tears. Good. Fear means we understand. Hope means we survive anyway. They stood together on the porch as the world dripped and melted around them, holding each other and the promise of new life. Inside, they could hear Tula singing, hear Ren correcting Tojo's pronunciation of some English word, hear all the sounds of family. What do we tell people? Reed asked eventually. When they see you're pregnant, when they ask questions, we tell truth, Asha said firmly. We tell them, this is our family, our choice, our life. And if they do not like it, she shrugged, then they do not like it. We survive anyway. Reed laughed, the sound surprising him with its lightness. You make it sound simple. Is not simple, is hardest thing we will ever do, but we already do hard things. We survive war, death, winter, grief. We can survive this too. She was right. They'd already survived impossible things. What was one more impossibility measured against what they'd already endured? All right, Reed said. We do it together then, all of it. All of it, Asha agreed. She kissed him there on the porch, with spring emerging and their future growing, and Reed tasted hope for the first time in 4 years. Not the desperate hope of a dying man, but the fierce hope of someone choosing to live. Inside, Tojo called for them, wanting to show them something. They went in together, hand in hand, stepping from the cold morning into warmth, stepping from what was into what would be. The cabin, once haunted by grief and silence, now breathed with life. The mantel held a beaded pouch instead of a photograph. The table seated 5 instead of 1. The air smelled like Tula's cooking and Ren's medicinal herbs, and the future taking shape. Reed looked at Asha, at Tojo, at Tula and Ren, at this family he'd never planned and couldn't imagine living without. Looked at all they'd built from mercy and necessity, and the stubborn refusal to let hate win. We lived, he said quietly. Asha squeezed his hand. Yes, and now we live more. Spring arrived tentatively at first, as if testing whether winter would let it stay. Patches of brown earth emerged from melting snow like promises. The creek swelled with runoff, its voice growing from whisper to shout. Birds returned their calls foreign after months of silence. And in the garden plot behind the cabin, Tula pressed seeds into thawing ground with hands that had forgotten the feel of warm soil. Reed stood watching her work, Asha beside him, her hand resting unconsciously on the belly that was just beginning to show. 3 months now since she'd told him about the baby. 3 months of watching her body change, of feeling terror and wonder war inside his chest every time he thought about what was coming. She plants like she is praying, Asha observed, watching Tula's careful movements. Maybe she is, Reed replied, praying we make it through another season. We will. Asha's certainty had become familiar, a bedrock he'd learned to lean on. We have survived worse than growing season. Tojo ran past, chasing a grasshopper through the emerging grass, his laughter bright as new coins. Ren followed at her own pace, her limp less pronounced now that warmth had returned. She'd taken to sitting on the porch in the afternoons, working leather or weaving baskets, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for threats that never came. The ranch was changing with the season. The cattle had survived winter lean but alive, and now they spread across greening pastures, rebuilding strength. The chickens laid eggs again, more than they could eat, which meant Tula could trade in town for supplies. The horses grew sleek and restless, ready to work. And Reed worked harder than he had in years, because now the work meant something beyond just passing time. He repaired fences with Asha's help, her growing belly not slowing her down despite his protests. They cleared irrigation ditches, prepared fields, built a larger coop for chickens, Tula wanted to add. Every nail driven, every post set was a declaration they were staying, they were building, they were claiming future out of the wreckage of past. But spring also meant people. The first visitor came on a Tuesday in late March. Reed was in the barn when he heard the horse approaching. His gut-clenched visitors meant questions, meant the careful story he and Asha had prepared might finally be tested. He stepped out to find Charlie Morrison, his nearest neighbor, dismounting. "Reed," Charlie called, friendly enough. "Haven't seen you since before the big snow. Wanted to check you made it through all right." "Made it fine," Reed replied, aware of Asha and Tula in the garden visible from where Charlie stood. "Lost a few chickens, but the important stock survived." Charlie's gaze had already found the women. His expression shifted, curiosity mixing with something harder to read. "Didn't know you'd taken on help." "Hired them in January," Reed said, the lie practiced and smooth. "Needed extra hands after the storm. They've been good workers." "Apache, aren't they?" Charlie's tone was carefully neutral, but Reed heard the judgment underneath. "They are. Thought the territory was supposed to be cleared of hostiles." "These aren't hostiles," Reed said, voice hard. "They're women and a child. Needed work, I needed help. Simple as that." Charlie studied him, and Reed could see him trying to reconcile the solitary man he'd known with this new version who kept Apache women on his property. "Your business, I suppose," he said finally. "Just surprised is all. After everything with the campaigns." "That was war," Reed said. "This is just trying to live." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Tojo came running around the corner of the cabin, saw the strange man, and stopped dead. He looked at Charlie with wary eyes, then ran to Asha, pressing against her skirts. Charlie watched the interaction, his gaze sharpening when Asha's hand came down to stroke Tojo's hair with obvious maternal affection. When she looked toward the barn, toward Reed, something in her expression made Charlie's eyebrows rise. "Reed," he said slowly, "that woman, she's my business," Reed interrupted. "Like you said." Understanding dawned across Charlie's face, followed by shock, then careful blankness. "I see. I see enough." Charlie moved toward his horse, clearly eager to leave. "Well, long as you're managing, that's what matters, though I'd be careful were I you. People talk and this kind of thing." He gestured vaguely toward Asha, "tends to get talked about more than most." "Let them talk." Charlie mounted, looking down at Reed with something between pity and disapproval. "Your funeral friend. Just don't be surprised when folks start keeping their distance." He rode off, and Reed stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Behind him he heard footsteps and turned to find Asha approaching Tojo, still clinging to her hand. "He knows," she said. "Yeah. He will tell others." "Yeah." Asha searched his face. "You are afraid of what comes next?" "Yes." Reed pulled her close, mindful of Tojo watching. but not afraid enough to send you away, not afraid enough to pretend this isn't real. Good. She leaned into him briefly, then stepped back. Because I am not going anywhere. None of us are. Charlie kept his word about talking. Within 2 weeks, Reed noticed the change. Neighbors who used to wave from the road now looked away. At the general store in town, conversations stopped when he entered. The blacksmith, who'd always been friendly, took his money without meeting his eyes. They knew, and knowing, they judged. Reed weathered it with gritted teeth, buying what supplies he needed and leaving quickly. But the isolation stung more than he'd expected. He'd chosen this life, chosen Asha and her family, but that didn't make being an outcast easy. They hate us, Wren observed one evening, watching Reed return from town with a fraction of the supplies he'd wanted. Shopkeeper refuses to sell. He sold, Reed said. Just made it clear I wasn't welcome to linger. This will get worse, Wren said. When baby comes, when they see proof of what you are together, this will get much worse. I know. And still you choose this. Choose us. Reed looked at Asha, her belly round now with 5 months of life growing. Looked at Tojo, helping Tula prepare dinner, chattering in a mixture of Apache and English. Looked at this family that had become his whole world. Still I choose this, he said firmly. Wren nodded slowly. Then we prepare for whatever comes. What came was Tom Wilson and 2 other men on a warm April afternoon. Reed saw them riding up and felt his stomach drop. Wilson was former cavalry, had ridden in some of the same campaigns as Reed. He'd always been hard prone to seeing enemies in every Apache face. Reed met them in the yard, positioning himself between them and the cabin where Asha and the others had retreated at his warning. Wilson, he said evenly. Holston. Wilson didn't dismount. Heard some interesting stories about you. Thought I'd come see for myself. See what? See if it's true you're keeping Apache squaws on your property. The word squaws was deliberately insulting, meant to provoke. Reed kept his voice level. I've got hired help. Their race isn't your concern. It is when they're hostile Apache, when they might be scouting for renegades, planning attacks. Wilson's hand rested casually on his rifle. Territory's got laws about harboring hostiles. They're not hostiles. They're women and a child. Apache are Apache, one of the other men said. Can't trust any of them. The cabin door opened and Asha stepped out, her pregnant belly visible even at a distance. The men's eyes locked on her, and Reed saw understanding, then disgust cross their faces. Jesus Christ, Wilson breathed. You got one of them pregnant. That's my business. It's everyone's business when a white man degrades himself with a savage. Wilson's voice rose. When he brings half-breed bastards into the world, you're a disgrace, Holston, a disgrace to your race and your uniform. Reed's fists clenched, but he held position. Get off my land. Not until you send those women packing. Send them to the reservation where they belong. This is their home, Reed said. They're not going anywhere. Wilson's face reddened. You're choosing them over your own kind, over everything we fought for. I'm choosing family over hate, Reed replied. Now get off my land before I make you. The men exchanged glances. They were armed, but so was Reed, and they were on his property. After a tense moment, Wilson wheeled his horse. This isn't over, he snarled. People are going to hear about this. You'll be finished in this territory. Then I'm finished. Reed stood his ground as they rode off, but I'm not giving them up. When they were gone, he turned to find Asha in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. I bring you this, she said brokenly. This hate, this judgment. I ruin everything you have. Reed crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. You haven't ruined anything. You've given me everything that matters. They will destroy you because of us. Let them try. He tilted her face up, making her meet his eyes. I've got you, got Tojo, got Tula and Wren, got a baby coming, got a family. What else matters? Your place in the world, your standing, your future. My future is right here, Reed said fiercely. With you, with all of you. Everything else is just noise. Asha buried her face against his chest, and he held her while she cried, while the baby moved between them, while the afternoon sun slanted across the yard. Tula appeared and wrapped her arms around both of them. Then Ren limping but determined. Then Tojo squeezing in wherever he could fit. They stood there, all of them, a knot of connection, in the face of a world that wanted them broken. We stay together, Tula said in Spanish. Whatever comes, we stay together. Together, Asha echoed. Together, Reed agreed. The harassment continued through spring. Someone cut his fence, letting cattle wander. Someone poisoned his well, forcing them to rely entirely on creek water. Rocks came through the window one night, glass shattering across the floor while they huddled together in the dark. But they endured. Reed repaired what was broken. Asha refused to hide, walking the property with her head high and her pregnant belly proud. Tula kept planting, kept cooking, kept humming her songs. Ren taught Tojo to shoot, to track, to defend what was theirs. And slowly, painfully, they built something that couldn't be torn down by hate. Summer came in hot and fierce. The crops Tula had planted grew strong, corn and squash and beans climbing toward the sky. The cattle fattened on good grass, and Asha's belly swelled with the promise of August. Reed found her one evening at the fence line, watching the sun set over their land. He came to stand beside her, and they stood in comfortable silence, her hand finding his. "Do you regret it?" she asked eventually. "Losing your place in the world for us?" Reed thought about it honestly. Thought about the loneliness of town visits, the hostility of former friends, the way doors closed when he approached. Thought about what he'd lost. Then he thought about what he'd gained. Morning coffee with Tula's laughter filling the cabin. Ren's gruff approval when he finally pronounced an Apache word correctly. Tojo calling him father without hesitation. Asha's body warm against his at night, their baby moving under his hand. "No," he said simply. "I don't regret a single thing. Even when they hate you. They hated me before just for different reasons. Hated me for surviving when others died. Hated me for coming back changed. At least now they hate me for something worth being hated for." He turned to her. "I'd rather be an outcast with you than accepted and alone." Asha smiled, that brilliant smile that still made his heart stutter. "Our baby will be beautiful," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "We'll have your stubbornness and my survival instinct. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance." She laughed, the sound carrying across the plain. Then she sobered. "We'll be hard for child, neither white nor Apache, belonging nowhere." "Wrong," Reed said. "Child will belong here, with us, with family. That's all that matters." "You make it sound simple." "Isn't it? We love the baby, raise them right, teach them they're worth something regardless of what the world says. Rest is just details." Asha leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I think you are foolish man, then I remember foolish men do not survive what you have survived. Maybe you are wise in ways I do not understand. Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit." "That too," she agreed. August arrived with heat that shimmered off the ground. The baby was due any day, and Asha moved through the cabin like a ship at sail, magnificent and determined. Tula prepared everything, clean cloths, water, herbs for pain. Ren positioned herself as guardian rifle, always close, watching for any threat. Tojo stayed near his mother, anxious and excited about becoming a brother. Reed tried to be useful and mostly just got in the way. He chopped wood. They didn't need repaired things that weren't broken, paced the porch until Ren told him to stop or she'd shoot him herself. Labor started on a Tuesday evening just as the sun began to set. Asha's water broke while she was helping Tula with dinner, and suddenly everything became immediate and real and terrifying. "Get out," Tula ordered Reed in Spanish. "This is women's work." Reed looked at Asha, saw pain and determination in her face. "I want to stay." Men do not stay for birthing, Ren said. This man does. Reed moved to Asha's side. If she'll have me. Asha gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. Stay, she gasped. Please stay. So he stayed, through hours of labor that seemed to stretch into eternity. Through Asha's pain, her strength, her curses in 3 languages. Through Tula's calm instructions and Ren's worried hovering and Tojo's wide-eyed fear from the doorway. He stayed through this moment when Tula said, push, and Asha bore down with everything she had. Through the first cry of new life entering the world. Through Tula's triumphant laugh as she held up a squalling, red-faced, perfect baby girl. A daughter, Tula announced. You have daughter. Asha reached for the baby with shaking hands, and Tula placed the child on her chest. Reed stared at this tiny person, this impossible blend of him and Asha, this proof that love could create beauty even when the world said it shouldn't. She's perfect, he whispered. She is ours. Asha corrected tears streaming down her face. Our daughter, our family, our proof that we were right. Reed touched the baby's tiny hand and impossibly small fingers wrapped around his. In that moment, everything he'd endured, everything he'd lost, everything he'd chosen, all of it made sense. This was why. This was what mercy led to. This was what happened when you chose love over fear. What do we name her? He asked. Asha looked at the baby, then at Reed, then at Tula and Ren and Tojo crowding close to see. Hope, she said. We name her Hope, because she is what we fought for, what we believed in when world said we were wrong. Hope, Reed repeated, testing the word. It fit, perfect and true and right. The baby Hope let out another cry, strong and fierce. Tula laughed and began cleaning her. Ren disappeared and returned with blankets. Tojo crept closer, awed by this new sister. Reed sat on the bed beside Asha, their daughter between them, and felt something he'd thought was dead forever come fully back to life. Not just survival, not just getting through, but actual, genuine, impossible joy. Outside, the sun set over land they'd claimed through will and work. Inside, a family that shouldn't exist by any reasonable standard, gathered around new life, around hope made flesh. We did it, Asha whispered. Despite everything, we did it. Yeah, Reed agreed. We did. The next morning, Reed stood on the porch with Hope in his arms, watching the sun rise. The baby slept against his chest, trusting and perfect. Behind him, he could hear the others stirring, Tula starting breakfast, Ren giving Tojo instructions in Apache, Asha resting after the night's labor. This was his family now, complicated, impossible, beautiful, built from the ruins of war and grief, constructed from mercy and stubborn love. They would face more hardship, more judgment, more people who wanted them broken, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. Asha appeared in the doorway, moving carefully, her body still recovering. She came to stand beside him, looking out at the land, greening under summer sun. What are you thinking? She asked. Reed looked down at Hope, then at Asha, then at the future spreading before them, like the plain, vast and uncertain and full of possibility. I'm thinking we lived, he said. We survived war, winter, hate, everything designed to destroy us. We lived and we built something worth living for. And now, he shifted Hope gently, now we teach her to do the same. Teach her that love is stronger than fear, that family is chosen, not just blood, that mercy matters more than revenge. Asha took his free hand, squeezing tight. You sound like man with hope. I am, Reed said, and meant it completely. For the first time in years, I actually am. They stood together as the sun climbed higher as the day began, as their daughter slept peacefully between them. They had planted roots in the desert against all odds, against all expectations. Those roots would grow deep and strong, fed by love and watered by the tears they'd shed to get here. The world might never accept them, Town might always turn away, but here on this land, they'd claimed through survival and stubbornness, they had everything that mattered. They had each other, they had family, they had hope, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.